Now that we've figured out the layout for Dundee Airport, I have come to the conclusion that the city really needs to expand. We're at episode 47 now and over a year of working on Oceania. With a few episodes out of Paterson, a couple on the countryside, and a few more making the map, that leaves us with roughly 35 episodes building Dundee. Granted, it's been a lot of detailing and we've definitely taken our time, but the city on the other side, I want to smash out in less than 10 episodes. I've always had a pretty good idea of what I was going to build out this way, but when I started building, man, it took a very different turn. But before we get into it, what do you think we should be calling this area? Is this still going to be Dundee or something completely different? And with this being Dundee's last big expansion, what do we need to include? Alright, so for inspiration, I'm looking at two obvious places that I'm putting into the category of over the bridge from the city, but still kind of the city. Kind of. North Sydney, Milson's Point, and Kirribilli should come as no surprise. I would like the skyline over this way to be sort of similar to North Sydney. With the amount of residents and offices, there's going to be a lot over here, so public transport and Australia's most confusing highway will also be included. I travel over this area pretty much every day for work, so I have a pretty good idea of what this place is like. But the other area of inspiration, the North Shore of Auckland, is an area I've never been to, but the way that the suburbs sprawl over their headlands, the types of architecture with the houses. But probably the biggest thing is going to be the landscape, which is going to feel more like Auckland than anywhere else. But apart from that, I'm going to leave it up to ideas and suggestions from you guys, and we'll just see how this thing ends up taking shape over the course of the next few episodes. Well, I did mention that we were making a bunch of unexpected changes in this episode. We're kicking it off with one of the biggest ones. I decided that we needed an extra pass to the little country town of Paterson. I originally created these mountains as a barrier between the countryside and the city, so that we had this illusion that the city was much further away from the countryside than really it was actually kind of close. But as the map becomes a little bit more developed and we get a bit more sense of scale in terms of the city and the mountains and the countryside and just how everything fits in with one another, and I just think that this little pass creates this nice connection. This road that is less traveled has far less infrastructure than the multi-lane highways that head towards the other areas on the map. This is definitely a slow road, a scenic drive. It is snaking and winding its way through some beautiful landscape, through the bushland and through this valley. It is a scenic drive, it is not the fastest route, and I don't think we're going to be seeing a huge amount of people using it because it is, in fact, the slower option for most people who live out of Dundee. But it just connects our map up a little bit more, which is, the whole purpose behind this map is about creating connections between all these different places. And I think it just adds just that little extra variation for the types of roads and types of journeys that people take along the map. With the road in place, I selected all the nodes and made sure that the gradient was not quite as crazy as it once was. I always find it much easier to get all the nodes in place and then just terraform around it. It makes it way more easier to create that cliffside, that more realistic cliffside look, and it is definitely a lot easier method than trying to get your nodes to fit in with a landscape that you have already spent a lot of time terraforming. I wanted this area to be quite different to anywhere else on the map, and with the giant cliffside outside of Paterson, I thought that we'd continue that theme throughout this area. So we are terraforming the landscape so that we've got some cliffs and then a little bit of erosion down below and covering the rest of it in with trees. We'll add in a little bit of extra detail as we get a little bit further into this area. And speaking of trees, let's get rid of a bunch. It's time to start mapping out what this area is going to look like. A couple of city services down here, waste management, sewage treatment, and the ferry terminal need a more permanent location. But hey, that's where the second downtown's going to go. I need to place them in a better location than that. But after removing all of them and flattening the landscape, I am left with an area that is far larger than I had anticipated. Which is probably why I have so many unexpected turns in this episode. because mostly I didn't realize that we had so much land to work with. You know, originally there was just the one hill on this area, and I had just thought that that was going to be some sort of zoo inspired by Taronga Zoo in Sydney, but I'm thinking about a different location for that, and for this area, probably no zoo. It's gonna be a zooless place. But we do have room for extra stuff. For instance, we now have a little bit of extra body of water, another little inlet as it stretches its way up into the valley, which is probably how the valley was created in the first place, was from this river or this water that came through and created that landform. I am adding in extra hills and valleys just to make my life a little bit extra more difficult when it comes to zoning out these places and creating a road layout that doesn't look completely insane. Mind you, the roads are pretty similar in both areas of inspiration, just completely crazy and all over the place, and I mean that's what I'm used to, which speaks volumes to the way that I create my road layouts in City Skylines. Just a bit of a breakthrough self-reflection there. This whole area in particular is taking inspiration from Auckland with these windy rivers and these muddy riverbanks. I wanted to create something kind of similar. You know, the landscape around this area that I'm creating is quite hilly, and with these valleys and these riverbanks, I think I'm going to create some really interesting types of neighborhoods. I'm envisioning a lot of parks in these areas and quite high land value, with these valleys creating some great places for recreation and maybe some marinas and some fish and chip shops and just some things like that. I think is going to make for some really nice, interesting spots. Whilst looking in this area, I also noticed this pretty cool looking bridge. I mean, it stretches for the majority of its time along this quay, along this break wall, and then it heads into this bridge, giving access to any boats that need to travel into this area. And you know what? I thought this would be a pretty cool addition, something I didn't really expect to be building, and I had the best spots to place it. Originally, there was just two ways of accessing the other side of the water. There was the Anzac Bridge, which is the main way, and then there's this windy road that stretches along the mountainside. But I figured we could use an extra one because there are going to be quite a lot of people living over there, so we're going to be building a bridge that stretches along this bay. After politely asking some of the residents to leave their building, I decided to build the bridge along this area because there is probably the shortest amount of distance, but then also providing some really nice vistas from other areas, so you can see this bridge really nicely. And now that we've got this bridge, well, the original road that was here, I mean, a little bit too bendy for the type of traffic we're going to be seeing. So needed to make the transitions a little bit smoother, much windier roads and less tight bends. And I was having a bit of trouble because, you know, we've already got a bit of a suburb here and it needed to hug the mountains in a realistic way. So just the bare bones for now. We'll come back to this area and add that intersection too, because I kind of just left it and, come back to it. And then in terms of the bridge itself, well, because this thing is mostly a quay, it needed to be fairly low to the water. And as soon as I lowered it into the water, I realized that the land below is it's pretty drastic. So just giving it a little bit of terraforming love and making it just a little bit easier to place down those quays. Making a little space for boats to pass underneath. I'm thinking about the types of things we're going to be building in this area. I'm thinking a couple of marinas might be nice, and even like a fishing pier, boat sheds, that kind of thing, I reckon would look pretty nice. I mean, we are kind of far away from the downtown, and I think they would be great to increase some of the land value around here, because I think that the land value is going to be really nice. So I do want to find ways, not just having parks, but different types of things in this area to increase that. Creating this bridge was pretty straightforward. After I had already dragged out the nodes, I was able to select them using Move It and then drag the nodes even closer to the road so that it was actually just touching the pavement on the sidewalk. And after I'd done that, using Move It again, dragging up the nodes of the bridge to give the boats, a bit of extra space to pass underneath. And because this bridge is essentially acting as a break wall, I wanted to continue that by I found this break wall in my collection. I was hoping it was going to be that rocky break wall instead, but I found this and I thought, you know what, we can actually use it. It is essentially just an extra wall, but it does create this really great extra little lower section that I wasn't really going for, but I don't know, kind of just worked out that way, so I dragged it out for the rest of the key, and I think it's a nice little touch. Coming back to our road that stretches from Dundee to the other side of the bay, I figured that it probably didn't really need anything too fancy in terms of an intersection, so I decided just to keep it pretty simple. We connect it up and we're just going to have a set of lights and provide a couple of dedicated turning lanes. But I also reckon this is going to be better to revisit once we have cars passing along and once we've got a bit of residents living on the other side. The last little thing that I wanted to do was to add some trees on the side of the road heading along the quay, and after that we were good to go for the mountains, the hills on the other side of the bay. Thinking about whereabouts they're going to be sitting in terms of some sort of a natural landform and the way that they interact with the water, creating some headlands, and thinking about where some suburbs are going to sit. Both Auckland and Sydney are pretty similar in terms of terrain, so, taking inspiration from those areas and thinking about what the land is going to be doing around the water, started to create some little pointy bits of land just heading into this bay and thinking about where potential islands might sit and what each little headland's going to look like. Is it going to be full of suburbs? Is it going to be a park? Is there going to be, I don't know, maybe like a little school or something? I'm still trying to figure all that sort of stuff out. The idea is that the majority of the houses and roads are going to sit on top of these hills, and they're going to have these valleys that are probably going to be parks, probably going to be little walks, and we'll have like little tiny bits of interest in there, but we'll just have to wait and see how much we end up building. And then the road, the highway stretching towards Dundee, we needed to figure out what that was going to look like. For inspiration, I'm looking at the most confusing highway in Australia. I'm calling it that because I still struggle to drive over this thing. I always end up in the wrong lane. There's just way too many lanes, and they all seem to go in similar directions, but kind of go to different places. That's really confusing, and I wanted to do the same thing for the people of Dundee. It's a snaky and windy highway, avoiding some hills, avoiding some valleys and the water, and there's also going to be, of course, grids and roads around here too, so, it's going to make a little bit more sense once we start zoning places up, but for now it's just a bit of a windy road. Speaking of which, winding up the headland from our little bridge is another main road that's going to be, I'm imagining this thing is going to get fairly busy. It is one of the more main roads around this area. It actually connects up quite a lot of Dundee to everything else. It's just a real main road, but it definitely has a bit of a snaky journey. I always speak about these main roads having a purpose, and by that, if it crosses the bay, then it goes across a bridge, then it's going to go for a pretty substantial distance. And as you can see, there's two main roads that are stretching along this area, and one of which is heading towards Anzac, and this one that's snaking up towards our little valley road that heads towards Patterson. It's a pretty big road. It's got a huge purpose. It's probably one of the original roads that stretched towards Patterson and connected up Dundee to Patterson, heading across the Anzac Bridge, and this one here is going across its own little bridge and is snaking its way to whatever towns we build further on that way. And at this point, I had completely forgotten about our train line, which also needed to get its way across to the rest of its connection, because there is a train line that stretches, all the way through Dundee, all the way through this place, and then stretches all the way to the town that's on the beach side. We haven't really developed that up yet, but there is a connection. So I had to figure out where it was going to sit, and originally I wanted it to go across the water so we could have some, I just think it looks nice. That's kind of like the only reason why I wanted to do it that way. I thought, wouldn't it be cool just having a train just traveling along the water edge with the city in the background? But you know what? It actually just doesn't really make any sense. Train lines are going to go through the busiest parts, connecting up passengers to, the heart of where people are living, not avoiding where people are living. Unless it's maybe, maybe an industrial line or a freight line, or maybe had a different purpose. But it didn't really make a huge amount of sense if this was going to be a passenger line. Why would it completely avoid whatever we got over here? So decided to, you know, we'll continue that idea. I still would really like to have a train line that snakes its way across the water's edge, maybe a little bit further on where there are some towns over that way. But for now, this one's going to go in the middle of this place. And what I'm sort of imagining is because we've got such a huge height difference, we're going to have to sort of incorporate some tunnels, and we're going to have a bit of a trench and try to make it as level as possible, because otherwise we don't have a huge amount of room over here, and adding in a train line just kind of, complicates things even more. But man, it's going to look pretty sick. And with people moving in the next episode and the population on this side getting pretty large, we needed to connect it up to the highway, and I decided just to keep it pretty simple for now, because I think we're going to make it extra complicated when we get some more officers in and know where things are going to be sitting a little bit better. So just thinking about some connections to the highway, to this main road, what we're doing here is I'm trying to connect it up in a way that is still kind of leaving the road intact and giving it a bit of direction towards the Anzac Bridge. Because like I said, there is, this road was probably once connected a little bit more substantially to the Anzac Bridge, but these days it's just a couple of ramps and a couple of high ramps, and then it goes back underneath the bridge. And, just keeping it pretty simple, because like I said, we're going to make things a little bit more complicated when we have a better idea of how everything is going to look in this area. It's a bit hard to judge, and I don't want to, I like working on these places when we have a bit of traffic, have a bit of an idea of what's happening. Plus, I would like to be taking a bit more inspiration from the Sydney Harbour Bridge. There's some really interesting and, some fun things to do with the Sydney Harbour Bridge in terms of its past uses, its, history with the trams that used to travel over it, and just how it's changed over the years, I think is pretty fascinating. So I like to take a bit more inspiration from that. But this highway, we're creating the most minimal of connections, and we'll just see how it goes. I will see how much it struggles with the increasing population. But it's really just we'll just connect it up here, we'll connect it up there, and drag a couple of nodes and do some node controlling, and that's it. That's all we're gonna do. With the highway now connected, I needed to finish up some of these main roads, connect them to the Great Beyond, and connect them to the rest of Dundee, because they're going to be playing a really important role when we start zoning up this place in the next episode. So thinking about where these roads are going to be heading, dragging up the small road up the mountain, it's snaking its way. It's a real windy road, because it's steep up there, man. It's very, very steep. And I find it kind of crazy that thinking about where we first started, where this episode first started, looking at that land and where we are now, I think there have been some drastic changes and some things that I really did not expect. I did not expect to have so much room over here, and I really didn't expect to be placing more than one hillside. We've got multiple hills and an extra body of water and multiple roads, and we're going to fit more than one little suburb over here. There's going to be a few neighborhoods, and I reckon a bit of room for some extra big things. Maybe another golf course, maybe a hospital, maybe, I don't know, maybe a zoo. Maybe I was wrong to deny a zoo over here. Maybe it belongs. But with all that done, I can hit play and people can resume their trip to Dundee. And next week, they're going to not just be driving through open green fields, but they'll be up a town. Maybe they'll be a downtown, or maybe they'll just be sprawling suburbs. Well, I guess you'll just have to wait and see. Hey guys, thank you all so much for watching today's episode of Oceania, and thanks to everyone who's been leaving feedback for the way that I've been editing my videos lately. A bit of a new format, I've been really enjoying it, and I'm glad to see that people have liking it too. So big thanks to everyone who's been leaving a bit of feedback. Definitely longer to edit, but it looks like people are watching for longer, which is great. Before I head off, I want to give a special shout outs to the people over on Patreon supporting the channel, making videos like this possible. John, George Bravo, Benjamin Munir, CJ Newton, Carlos Rodriguez, John, spelled Jon, Fluffy the Cat, TJ Reed, Megalodon, Matt Austin, Ajo, Emil, and Dominic Martin. Thank you guys so much for your support, and I'll catch you in the next one.